"It was just a dare. Relax," she laughed after kissing another guy. So I walked out without a word. They say the person you love can break your heart with a single sentence, but for me, it was a laugh. Hey everyone, before we get into the video, don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button if you want more stories just like this. Thanks for the support. My name is Caleb, and I was 23 years old when I learned that the sound you once considered your favorite melody in the world could, in an instant, become the most grating noise you had ever heard. That melody was the sound of Maya's laugh. For 2 years, it had been the soundtrack to my life. It was a bright, cascading thing, full of unfiltered joy that could pull me out of the darkest moods. When she laughed, her whole face lit up, her eyes crinkling at the corners, and it felt like the sun had chosen to shine just for us. We met in college, in a crowded lecture hall where I was a nervous sophomore, and she was a radiant junior who seemed to know everyone. She was the embodiment of life itself, a whirlwind of social energy and vibrant charm. I was the opposite, a quiet observer who preferred the company of a good book and a small group of close friends. But she saw me. She saw past the quiet exterior and found something worth knowing, and in doing so, she pulled me into her orbit and painted my monochrome world with 1,000 brilliant colors. Our relationship was, from my perspective, perfect. We balanced each other out. She coaxed me out of my shell, introducing me to new experiences and people, and I provided her with a steady, calm harbor to return to when the world became too loud. We spent our weekends exploring hidden hiking trails, our weeknights cooking elaborate meals we'd found on the internet, and our quiet moments simply existing in the same space, a comfortable silence that spoke volumes. I loved her with a depth that scared me sometimes, a love that felt so fundamental to my being that I couldn't imagine a future without her in it. I had already started picturing it, the small house with the big porch, the dog that would undoubtedly be more her side than mine, the lazy Sunday mornings. It was all there, a clear and beautiful path stretching out before us. The night everything changed started like so many others had. It was her friend's birthday, a massive house party that I was already dreading on some level. Large crowds weren't my scene, but for her, I would go anywhere. I watched her get ready, a ritual I never tired of. She moved with a dancer's grace, humming to herself as she applied makeup with a practiced hand. She turned to me, a vision in a deep blue dress that matched her eyes, and gave me that smile, the one that made my heart do a little flip. She asked if I was ready to go have some fun. I nodded, my voice catching slightly as I told her she looked beautiful. In that moment, looking at her, I felt a surge of pure, uncomplicated happiness. I was the luckiest guy in the world, and I was about to go celebrate with the person who made me feel that way. We drove to the party, the music thumping from a block away. As we walked up the driveway hand in hand, she squeezed my fingers, a silent gesture of excitement. I squeezed back, trying to absorb some of her energy. The house was already packed, a sea of familiar and unfamiliar faces. The air was thick with the smell of cheap beer, perfume, and something vaguely like spilled fruity cocktails. Maya was immediately swept into a hug by the birthday girl, and I watched her dissolve into the crowd, a bright blue fish in a chaotic ocean. I found a relatively quiet corner near the snack table and settled in, content to watch her work the room. She was magnetic, drawing people to her with an effortless charm. And then I saw him. It was Leo, an old high school friend of hers who had recently moved back to town. I'd met him a couple of times. There was always something about him that set my teeth on edge, a cocky swagger in his step and a way of looking at Maya that lingered a moment too long. He was standing by the keg, and when his eyes met hers across the room, a wide knowing grin spread across his face. Maya smiled back and waved, a gesture that was probably innocent. But in the pulsating lights of the party, it felt like a spark landing in a puddle of gasoline. A small, cold knot of unease began to form in the pit of my stomach. The knot in my stomach tightened as the night wore on. I tried to shake the feeling, telling myself I was just being paranoid, that my natural aversion to crowds and loud noise was coloring my perception. I grabbed a soda and tried to focus on the terrible art on the walls, but my eyes kept drifting back to Maya. She was the undeniable center of gravity in the room. People orbited around her, laughing at her jokes, hanging on her every word. And Leo was always nearby, a satellite that was drifting a little too close for comfort. I watched them talk, their heads bent together. She would throw her head back and laugh at something he said. That same laugh I adored, now sounding different in this context, sharper somehow. He would touch her arm lightly when he made a point, a casual gesture that he seemed to make a little too often. Each time he did, a fresh wave of irritation washed over me. I knew I should go over there, put my arm around her, stake my claim in a quiet, confident way. But something held me back. I didn't want to be that guy, the possessive boyfriend who couldn't let his partner breathe. I trusted her, or at least I told myself I did. An hour or so later, the crowd in the living room began to thin out slightly as people migrated to the backyard or the kitchen. A group had settled on the floor in a circle, and a bottle of tequila was placed in the center. I knew what was coming. Truth or dare, the bane of mature relationships everywhere. Maya, of course, was immediately recruited. She shot me a look from across the room, a playful, mischievous glint in her eyes. She loved this kind of thing, the reckless abandon of a party game. I gave her a weak smile and a small shrug, hoping she'd see my lack of enthusiasm and maybe sit this one out. She didn't. She plopped down on the floor between the birthday girl and, to my profound dismay, Leo. The game started predictably enough. A few embarrassing truths about past crushes, a few silly dares involving chugging mystery drinks or serenading a houseplant. The laughter was loud and uninhibited. I stayed in my corner, feeling more and more like a chaperone than a participant. I watched Maya take her turn, spinning the bottle with a flick of her wrist. It wobbled and spun, a glass tornado of impending doom, before slowing to a stop, its neck pointing directly at Leo. A collective "ooh" went through the group. The birthday girl, grinning wickedly, looked at Maya and then at Leo. The dare she issued was simple, yet it landed in the room like a lead weight. She dared Maya to kiss Leo. Not a peck on the cheek, a real kiss, for 10 seconds. The room erupted in a mix of drunken cheers and encouraging catcalls. My blood ran cold. Every muscle in my body tensed. My eyes were locked on Maya, waiting for her to laugh it off, to say no, to look at me and see the horror written all over my face. But she didn't. Instead, she looked at Leo, a slow, challenging smile spreading across her lips. It was a look of pure, unadulterated fun, a look that said, "Game on!" Then she turned her head and her eyes found mine in the crowded room. For a split second, our gazes connected. I searched her face for a sign, any sign of hesitation, of respect for me, for us. But all I saw was the thrill of the dare, the fire of the moment. She was enjoying this. She was enjoying the attention, the drama, the risk. In that instant, the world seemed to slow down. The thumping bass of the music faded into a dull, distant thrum. The voices of the crowd became a meaningless hum. All I could see was her face, alight with a joy that had nothing to do with me, and all I could feel was that knot in my stomach finally bursting into a cold, heavy dread. She held my gaze for a moment longer, a silent question in her eyes, as if daring me to object, to be the killjoy. And then she turned back to Leo. What happened next felt like it was unfolding in slow motion. A torturous, frame-by-frame sequence burned into my memory. Maya leaned in toward Leo. It wasn't a hesitant movement. It was deliberate, confident. Leo, for his part, met her halfway, a triumphant smirk already playing on his lips. His hands came up to rest on her waist, pulling her slightly closer. That was the moment something inside of me broke. It wasn't the kiss itself, not yet. It was the way his hand settled on her body, a place that was supposed to be sacred, a space reserved for me. It was the way she allowed it, the way she seemed to melt into it for a fraction of a second. Their lips met. The room around me exploded in a roar of approval, but the sound was warped, as if I were hearing it from underwater. I watched, frozen in place, as the seconds ticked by. 1, 2,
3. It wasn't a quick, playful peck. It was a real kiss, deep and involved. 4. 5. 6. Her hand came up to cup the side of his face, a gesture of intimacy that sent a jolt of pure, white-hot pain through my chest. 7. 8. 9. 10. They pulled apart, and the cheering intensified. Maya's face was flushed, her eyes bright with the adrenaline of the moment. She threw her head back and laughed. It was that same laugh, the one I had once cherished, but now it was like shards of glass in my ears. It was the sound of betrayal. She looked directly at me, her eyes sparkling, expecting to see me laughing along, to see me being a good sport, to see me accepting this public humiliation as a harmless bit of fun. She saw something else entirely. I must have been pale, my face a stony mask of shock and pain. Her laughter faltered for just a second, a flicker of confusion crossing her features. One of her friends, noticing the tension, asked her if everything was okay, nudging her head in my direction. Maya turned to her friend, her expression instantly shifting back to one of breezy nonchalance. She waved a dismissive hand in my direction, a small, condescending smile on her face. I watched her lips form the words, and even though the music was loud, I could hear them as clearly as if she were screaming them in my ear. She said, "It was just a dare, relax." And then she laughed again. That was it. That was the moment the entire world I had built with her crumbled into dust. It wasn't the kiss was the symptom, a vulgar display of disrespect. The disease was the laughter, the casual, cruel dismissal of my feelings. The disease was the complete and utter lack of empathy, the failure to even consider for a second how I might feel watching the person I loved, the person I had planned my future with, kiss someone else and then laugh about my pain. In that moment, I saw her clearly for the first time, not through the rose-tinted glasses of love,
but with the harsh, unforgiving light of reality. I saw a person who was so wrapped up in her own fun, her own need for validation, that she was incapable of seeing the damage she left in her wake. The love I felt for her, the deep and profound love that had defined my existence for 2 years, didn't just fade. It was extinguished, snuffed out in an instant by that one cruel laugh. The pain was still there, a sharp physical ache in my chest, but it was joined by something new, a cold, hard clarity, a sense of absolute certainty. There was no coming back from this. There was no discussion to be had, no apology that could fix it. The trust was gone, shattered into a million pieces. The respect was gone, evaporated by her casual cruelty. And without trust and respect, there was nothing left. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel sad. I just felt done. I looked at her one last time, still laughing with her friends, already moving on to the next topic of conversation, the drama of the dare already forgotten for her. I was just an afterthought, a problem to be managed. I turned away, my movements feeling strangely calm and deliberate. Turning my back on that scene was the single most difficult and yet the easiest thing I have ever done. It was a physical act of severance, a tearing of the fabric that had connected us. I didn't say a word. I didn't slam a door. I didn't make a scene. My silence was my statement. It was a wall she couldn't argue with, a truth she couldn't spin. I began to walk, pushing my way through the throng of partygoers. They were a blur of faces and bodies, obstacles in my path to freedom. A few people I vaguely recognized tried to get my attention, clapping me on the shoulder, shouting something over the music that I couldn't decipher. I didn't respond. I just kept walking, my eyes fixed on the front door. My entire world had narrowed to this one objective: get out. The journey from the living room to the front door, a distance of maybe 50 feet, felt like it took an eternity. Every step was a conscious effort. My legs felt heavy, as if I were wading through cement. The thumping bass of the music was a physical assault, vibrating in my chest and mocking the steady, frantic rhythm of my own heart. I could still hear her laugh echoing in my head, a ghostly soundtrack to my escape. I finally reached the hallway leading to the door. It was quieter here, a temporary reprieve. I passed the half-open bathroom door and the closed door of the master bedroom. I remembered our jackets. I had taken hers and mine and thrown them on the bed when we arrived. I hesitated for a fraction of a second, my hand on the doorknob to the bedroom. Did I really need my jacket? The instinct to just flee, to run out into the night and never look back, was overwhelming. But a more practical part of my brain kicked in. It was a cool night, and my wallet and keys were in the pocket. I pushed the door open. The room was dark, save for a sliver of light from the hallway. And there, on the bedside table, was a framed photo of the two of us. It was from our trip to the coast last summer. We were standing on a windswept beach, her hair a chaotic mess, my arms wrapped tightly around her from behind. We were both smiling, genuine, carefree smiles. It was a perfect moment, a captured memory of a love that I now realized had only ever existed on my side. I stared at that photograph, at the happy, unsuspecting fool in the picture. I felt a pang of something, a strange mix of nostalgia and pity for that guy. He had no idea what was coming. I picked up our jackets. I held hers for a moment, the soft fabric smelling faintly of her perfume. The scent that once brought me comfort now felt like a poison. I dropped it back onto the bed. I didn't want it. I didn't want any part of it. I slipped my own jacket on, checked my pocket for my wallet and keys, and walked out of the room, leaving the photo, the jacket, and the ghost of our relationship behind. I opened the front door and stepped out into the cool night air. The sudden silence was deafening. The noise of the party was muffled, a distant, irrelevant hum. I stood on the porch for a moment, taking a deep, ragged breath. The air was crisp and clean, and it felt like the first real breath I had taken all night. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. The screen was a cascade of notifications. A string of missed calls from Maya, starting from just a minute after I had walked away. And a series of text messages. The first one read, "Where are you?" Then, a minute later, "Caleb, this isn't funny." Then, "Answer your phone." The messages grew more frantic, more desperate, more accusatory. "Seriously? You're leaving? Over a dare? You're being so childish right now. Call me." I read them all, my face a blank slate. There was no apology, no understanding, just anger and indignation that I had dared to have a feeling, that I had dared to react in a way that didn't suit her. I ignored them all. With a steady hand, I opened my ride-sharing app and ordered a car. The little icon appeared on the map, just a few blocks away. I was getting out. I was leaving her to her party, her friends, her dares. I was leaving her to the consequences of her own actions. My phone buzzed again. Another text from her. This one was different. It was short, sharp, and designed to inflict maximum damage. It simply said, "Fine, don't come back." I looked at the words, and a strange sense of calm washed over me. Okay, I wouldn't. The ride home was a silent, surreal journey. I sat in the back of the car, staring out the window as the city lights blurred into streaks of color. The driver, a middle-aged man with a weary expression, glanced at me in the rearview mirror a couple of times, but wisely said nothing. I was grateful for the silence. It gave me space to exist inside the strange, hollowed-out feeling that had taken up residence in my chest. I wasn't crying. The tears would come later, I was sure, but for now, there was just a profound and unnerving numbness. My phone continued to vibrate in my pocket, a frantic, buzzing reminder of the life I was leaving behind. Maya's calls and texts were now joined by messages from her friends, people I had thought were my friends too. They were a chorus of judgment and misunderstanding. "Dude, what's wrong with you? Maya's a wreck. You need to call her. It was a stupid game. Don't be so dramatic. You're overreacting and ruining everything." I read each message with a growing sense of detachment. They saw a guy throwing a tantrum over a kiss. They couldn't see that the kiss was merely the final straw, the undeniable proof of a truth I had been subconsciously avoiding for months. The car pulled up to my apartment building. I thanked the driver, my voice sounding foreign and distant to my own ears, and walked inside. The silence of my own apartment was a stark contrast to the chaos I had just left. It was clean, orderly, and utterly empty. The space that usually felt like a sanctuary now felt like a tomb. I dropped my keys on the counter and walked into the living room. Everywhere I looked, there were reminders of her. The blanket she loved to curl up in on the couch, the silly coffee mug she had bought me for my birthday, the stack of DVDs we had watched together 100 times. It was like a museum dedicated to a dead relationship. I sank onto the couch and finally let my mind go back. Not to the party, but further. I started replaying scenes from our relationship, looking for the clues I had missed. I remembered the time she had stayed out until 4 in the morning with her friends, answering my worried texts with breezy replies about how I needed to trust her more. I remembered the way she would flirt with waiters or bartenders, always waving it off as just being friendly. I remembered how she would constantly need external validation, her mood often dictated by the amount of likes her latest social media post received. I had seen all these things, but I had explained them away. She was just a free spirit. I was just being insecure. I loved her, so I made excuses for her. But now, seen through the lens of what had happened tonight, those small cracks in the foundation of our relationship looked like massive, unbridgeable chasms. The problem was never the dare. The problem was never even Leo. The problem was a fundamental incompatibility, a deep-seated lack of respect for the sanctity of what we were supposed to be building together. She saw our relationship as a source of fun and convenience, something that enhanced her life but didn't require any real sacrifice or consideration. I saw it as my entire world. The realization was a cold, hard slap in the face. I had built my life around someone who saw me as a piece of furniture, nice to have around but ultimately interchangeable. My phone buzzed again, pulling me from my thoughts. It was another text from Maya. The previous ones had been angry and demanding. This one was different. It was a final, desperate attempt to regain control. It read, "So you're just going to throw away everything we have over one stupid kiss? I can't believe you're being this pathetic."
I thought you were stronger than this. I read the words once. Then I read them again. Pathetic. Weak. That was her final takeaway. That my pain, my betrayal, my decision to walk away from something that had become toxic was a sign of weakness. And in that moment, the numbness finally began to crack. A new emotion broke through the surface, sharp and clear and cold. It wasn't sadness. It was anger, a quiet, righteous anger that burned away the last vestiges of my doubt. She was right about one thing. I was going to throw everything we had away, because everything we had was built on a lie. The anger that surged through me was not a fiery, explosive rage. It was a cold, controlled fire, a forge in which I would melt down the remnants of my old self and forge something new. Her text, with its casual cruelty and final attempt to belittle my feelings, was the catalyst I needed. It was the permission slip I didn't know I was waiting for. With a sense of calm purpose, I picked up my phone. I didn't reply. I didn't engage. I simply went to her contact, pressed and held, and selected Block Contact. Then I went to her friends' numbers, the ones who had sent their own messages of judgment, and blocked them too. One by one, I severed the digital ties that bound me to that world. With each tap of the screen, I felt a little lighter, a little freer. The buzzing in my pocket ceased, the silence that followed was absolute, and it was glorious. The next few days were a strange period of quiet deconstruction and reconstruction. I went to work, moving through the motions on autopilot, my mind a million miles away. My colleagues noticed I was quieter than usual, but they gave me my space. In the evenings, instead of collapsing on the couch and letting the emptiness consume me, I started to act. I packed up every single reminder of Maya, the blanket, the mug, the DVDs, the framed photos. I put it all in a box and shoved it into the back of my closet, out of sight. I wasn't ready to throw it away, but I was ready for it to be gone from my daily life. I cleaned my apartment from top to bottom, scrubbing away the physical traces of her, trying to create a space that was wholly mine again. I started cooking for myself again, not the elaborate meals we used to make, but simple, nourishing food. I reconnected with parts of myself that had been dormant. I picked up my old guitar, the calluses on my fingers long since faded, and stumbled my way through the chords of songs I used to love. I went for long runs through the city, the rhythmic pounding of my feet on the pavement, a meditative chant that cleared my head. I was not just grieving the end of a relationship, I was rediscovering the person I was before it began, the person who didn't need someone else's laughter to validate his existence. About 2 weeks after the party, I was sitting in my favorite coffee shop, a book open in front of me that I was actually reading and absorbing. The sun was streaming through the window, warming my face. For the first time in a long time, I felt a genuine sense of peace. It wasn't loud, boisterous happiness. It was a quiet, steady contentment. I looked up from my book and saw a couple sitting at a nearby table. They were leaning toward each other, whispering and laughing, lost in their own little world. A familiar pang shot through my chest, an echo of the pain I had felt. But this time it was different. It wasn't a pang of longing or jealousy. It was a pang of memory, a distant recognition of a past life. I looked at them and felt no bitterness, only a faint, wistful sadness for what I had lost, and a profound gratitude for what I had found in its place: myself. I realized then that walking out of that party without a word was the strongest thing I had ever done. It wasn't an act of weakness or childishness, as she had claimed. It was an act of profound self-respect. It was a declaration that my feelings mattered, that my heart was not a plaything, and that I deserved better than to be an afterthought in someone else's drama. I finished my coffee, closed my book, and stood up to leave. As I walked out into the afternoon sun, I felt a sense of possibility stretching out before me. The path was no longer the one I had planned with Maya. It was a new, unwritten road, and for the first time I was excited to see where it would lead. I was on my own, and I was okay. In fact, I was more than okay. I was just beginning.